I had a call with the person the other day and they were like, yeah, we talked to an agent, but they were part-time. I'm like, why would you get a part-time agent? I mean, you need a full-time agent on this stuff. You can't have somebody's where they're doing another job and they're not focused on the job at hand.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Shawn and Matt Show. My name is Matt, that is Shawn, and welcome to our show. Shawn, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about an article that the Washington Post came out with about buying a house, entitled Buying a House, Here's What to Watch Out For with the New Contracts. And it seems like a lot of the mainstream media is skewing in one direction against real estate. I'm just going to put it out there. I just don't think the mainstream media likes real estate agents.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they think that agents are out to get everyone and they're out to screw everyone over and commissions are too high and, yada, yada, yada. So Shawn and I are going to go through this and tell you whether these tips are factual things that we're seeing happening or if it's a bunch of baloney.
Yeah,
Ready?
Sounds good to me.
All right, Shawn, let's start with commissions. Okay. Commissions are the fees agents get when a sale closes. Under the old system, they typically totaled 5 to 6% of the sales price, and they were paid entirely on the seller side. Now the sellers must decide whether to offer compensation to buyers' agents in addition to their own. And buyers must decide what type of payments to offer their agent and what specific services they want. So here's what they're saying home buyers should look out for. Consumer advocates suggest buyers should push for a flat fee based on their housing budget and make sure they fill out the commissions field on any contract they agree to. Shawn, what are your thoughts on just that first sentence?
I mean, you can do a flat fee. You could always do a flat fee if you wanted to. And that's what I want to preface this with is the agreement that the buyer signed has always been there for us in the state of Virginia and our local DC market. So that's always been there. And it's kind of always been the same. What if that seller wasn't paying out the commission that you had signed in your agreement? It's still the same thing. Doesn't matter. It's just on a different agreement. So yeah, you can try to get a flat fee out of agents if you really want to, but most people, and the most of the times that I've ever done this, it's been a percentage of the sale. And so to see it as a flat fee is a little bit different. Now there's hybrid models out there, and this whole change was going to bring about a different industry, different people that were going to decide to do business in a different way. So yeah, you might run into the opportunity to do it for a flat fee. However, is that typical? I would say probably not from what I've seen. I've never really run into flat fees. I've never done a flat fee before. In a listing side, I have. On a buy side, I have not.
So where did this flat fee come from? Because it's always kind of been there as an option, but I don't think we've really seen it as a popular model, and popular, in air quotes. I don't think we've seen this as a discussed model till recent years.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been out there. You've always been able to do it, but I think the industry standard, or, I hate to say that, but like we've always just done a percentage of commission or percentage of sale. And people, it's funny when people like get into the nitty gritty about like, oh, well, I paid $5,000 more and you're going to make more money. I'm like, do you know what the difference of $5,000 in a commission? It's not like I don't care about that, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm here to get you under contract, but the difference in $5,000 in a sales price isn't making or breaking me, So I could understand the side of flat fees. Now there's always been flat fee brokerages on the list side, on the buy side. On the buy side, I never saw it so much because I think the listing side, because the seller always paid the commissions through the listing and the cooperation between the buyer and listing agency, you didn't see flat fee as much. You'd see it every once in a while, but it wasn't popping up as much. But on the listing side, sure, you did see that. There are models out there. Will we see it more often? Possibly. But from what I'm seeing right now as boots on the ground, just ratified 5 listings in the last week, 2 weeks, everybody requests their commission on the buyer or on the contract now. So your buyer fee is paid through on the contract. Seller is still opting to pay that in most instances from what I've seen. And most requests are a percentage, not a flat fee. All of them are a percentage of the actual sales contract and not a flat fee.
Redfin report came out recently that said the average commission per agent was 2.55% in July, down from 2.62% in January. So it seems like there's this small, loud corner of the internet that is saying, let's do flat fee. Let me get a title attorney. Let me just get a real estate attorney on it. Let's just take care of this with, as little payment as possible. But ultimately, there are service professionals out there that will only perform a job if it's worth it to them. Like they're only going to be sacrificing their weekends if it's worth it to them. They're only going to be missing their kids' soccer practices if it's worth it to them. So for those of you out there that are saying, oh, let's just do it for a flat fee, or, oh, I tried to negotiate a flat fee, but then my agent, only agreed to 2.5%. It's like, well, you're bad at negotiating, because there's agents out there that probably do it for less. But it's got to be worth it to the agent. And so I think right now what the market is finding is where is that number that consumers are getting value and agents are determining their worth.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is what kind of agent do you want and what kind of service would you like? And the article goes through different types of this as well. But, really, if you want the best agent in the area or the agent that knows that neighborhood the best or that county the best, you're probably going to have to pay what they're willing to do the work for, right? So if you want my services, and again, you want to screw up my weekends and you want me to be going out when I could be spending time with my family or somewhere else, then you're going to have to pay for that because I have 21 years in the business and I'm not going to do it for, pennies on the dollar. But, what I want to say here is like they always generalize, these articles are always generalizing. Oh, well, the average is this percentage. But if you look at some other areas, naturally, you can't, they're going to charge 3% because their dollar value or their house values are a lot less than here in the DC market. The DC market, you might see a sliding scale of commission rates because, let's face it, it's a lot more expensive. So a per transaction thing is going on here. But what I also want to tell you is that the DC market is completely different than some other markets in the United States. And so here we see typically a very seller's market where buyers are competing. And so you better have a good agent on your side. Number one, getting you in the property before the open house, because what happens, Matt? Everybody's like now going to these open houses trying to get away from, oh, I'm not going to hire a buyer agent. But you're already late because the people that have agents have already gone in. They're already calling you, trying to get a deal done before the open house. And some agents will cave to that. Others will put a deadline. It just depends. So if you want the best recommendation or the best agent out there, you're going to have to pay for it. And in the end, you're going to be happy, hopefully, because they've gotten you the deal that you want. They've got you the house that you want without a lot of pain. And they've beat out every other offer because they're experienced in the market and they know how to write the contract.
Well, what type of agent is going to accept $1,000? What type of agent is going to accept $2,000? Like, if you're really looking for an agent to accept this amount, what happens when they do? All right, so now you're in negotiations for the sales price. How hard are they going to fight for that sales price? How hard are they going to fight for the home inspection repairs? How hard are they going to fight to get that to closing? If it's only worth, a very minimal amount, I would call into question what type of service professional and what type of quality you're getting on that front.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing is a lot of times you're getting the people that don't do this full time. I had a call with the person the other day and they were like, yeah, we talked to an agent, but they were part-time. I'm like, why would you get a part-time agent? I mean, you need a full-time agent on this stuff. You can't have somebody's where they're doing another job and they're not focused on the job at hand. And so you have to be careful on what you're getting.
All right, next thing that the Washington Post points out, additional fees. Contracts can include extra fees on top of a commission, such as administrative, transaction, or retainer fee. While they aren't new, buyers need to be aware of agreeing to these fees up front. Administration or transaction fees, sometimes totaling as much as $600, can slip past buyers. Shawn, what are your thoughts on admin or transaction fees?
Yeah, I mean, these are costs typically that are passed down through you because the brokerage or somebody might be charging a fee to that agent per transaction. So they push that along to the buyer. And I've seen it before. Personally, I don't charge transaction fees on top of the commission. I feel like, all right, my commission is this, and I'm not charging a per transaction fee. And if any fees come through on me from my brokerage, I cover them, and they do, right? But the thing is, I'm allowed to charge that. That could be part of my fee. And there's plenty of agents, and I talk to them all the time. They're like, hey, we charge this transaction fee because I mean, these are my services. And if I'm charged money, and we're all charged percentages of, we pay fees to our brokerages. On top of those fees, there might be transaction fees, and we're allowed to pass those along. So you can understand why an agent would charge it, because they're like, hey, I'm getting docked here and I need to recoup that. Is that always the case? No. Some agents choose to do it, some don't. I don't charge them, and I don't think I've ever charged them, and what I get is what I get in the end.
So according to the Consumer Federation of America, these fees are usually not justified because such services should be covered in commissions. You ever see the HUD one, the whatever they're calling it, the Alta statement, where the commission's like $12,000 and then there's a $495 transaction fee? That's so silly.
Yeah.
Like, just eat that fee. It's much easier with one number. Then you start doing an admin fee, a transaction fee, a broker fee on top of the commission fee. It's just junk fees. It rubs me the wrong way. And
I always felt guilty. Honestly.
You know,
like I feel like slimy to do that. So I'm like, listen, I know what my costs are for this, and this is what I'm charging, right? So, but to each their own. And I know plenty of agents that do it, and they feel fine doing it, and they have their reasons for doing it. So
yeah, for the consumers out there, I would strongly try to strike this out, or wonder why it's there, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. All right, third one up is cash payments. So it's been long common that real estate deals do include payments directly from the seller to the buyer at closing to help cover costs like appraisals, fees, taxes, title search, renovation, or even agent fees. In other cases, payments go directly from the seller to the buyer's agent as sort of a finder's fee. So a range of terms including concessions, additional compensation, bonuses, incentives, rebates, or valuable considerations appear in draft contracts, but some contracts allow for these payments as long as they're disclosed, and some do not. So, Shawn, why it matters. When concessions go to the buyer, they offset the cost of buying a house. Seller payments given to agents without the buyer's knowledge, however, have been criticized by some consumer advocates as a form of bribery that could compromise an agent's ability to objectively represent the buyer. So, Shawn, what are your thoughts on, let's call it, incentives to close the deal that are paid to the buyer's agent?
Yeah, I mean, I see this a lot, or I used to see it a lot, where you'd say, all right, X percent plus this percent as a bonus if you close, or if you get somebody in here before X date. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean, like, truthfully, I tell my clients all the time, like, I have a listing now where they tried to do that before I was the listing agent. I'm like, it doesn't work. It's not going to bribe anybody to come in, because it's the people that have the buyers that are bringing buyers in. That's it, period. So if they've got a buyer and your property fits their buyer's criteria, they're going to show the property because you're paying X percent or whatever. But it's not like we're going to go through and like, oh, this has a bonus, let's run. Hey, you want to buy this place that has a bonus? It doesn't work that way.
The buyer has to like the house.
The buyer has to like the house.
And if they like the house, maybe they're going to write the offer whether or not there's a bonus or not.
Right, of course. And, where I might side differently is with builders. Builders sometimes will do this when the market's slow. Hey, builders, come on, pay it because you owe us, because you've always been cutting the commissions on sides. But on the MLS, this was a strategy. Some people said it worked. Some agents would say, oh, I think you should do this. In my opinion, I've always been like, listen, what is going to help you more? If you gave a $5,000 bonus for Matt to bring in his client on top of the commission, he's not even going to know that bonus exists, to be honest. Way you're going to get somebody in that property is by reducing it by the $5,000. Reduce the price. That's how you get people in. That's how you get the property noticed again, not by giving an incentive.
I think I saw a recent price drop. The house was like, $289,000, and they dropped it to like $286,000.
Doesn't work.
It's like, wow. I don't know.
Thanks for the $3,000.
$3,000 is going to get people to jump off the couch. Yeah, so I'm out on cash payments. Like the whole bonus, I don't think it works. I think you just got to change your price.
Yeah, and the other thing is seller subsidies. I mean, seller subsidies have been around for a long time. And just quickly, yes, they're shown on the contract. Seller subsidy and now agent commission. It's all a subsidy. That's all a cash payment basically at settlement. Has to be shown on the contract and then has to be shown on the settlement statement.
Next one on the list is conflict of interest. Both the NAR and consumer advocates say that buyers should be aware of dual agency agreements, such as those allowing the buyer's agent to represent other buyers bidding on the same property. Ooh, that's not where I thought they were going to go with this.
That was different, right?
Or letting an agent represent the buyer and the seller. Shawn, thoughts on dual agency?
Dual agency, I don't do it. I've done it in the past just because I didn't know any better, I think. Like I tried it and I'm like, wow, this was difficult and it sucked. And somebody felt like they were being taken advantage of, and I will never do it again. And when it comes down to it, it's not worth the money. It's not worth so what happens is I can represent both the seller, who I have a listing agreement with, and the buyer, who I may have a buyer agreement with, or they could be somebody new and I sign a buyer agreement with them. Now they both want to do the same transaction, and I'm the middle person. That's a dual agency in the state of Virginia, and I will not do it. I always sign my listing agreements that say I am not going to do it. And if I do have a buyer that wants to write on this property, I can then send that off to a teammate like Matt or Miguel or somebody on our team that could write the contract. That way there's a separation. And honestly, that would then become a designated agency. Designated agency, I believe, is okay. That is a separation. We're under the same broker. And that could be agency-wide. It could be anybody within our company writing on my listing. We're under one broker. Or it could be one of my teammates. And I've done this many times where I have a buyer for a property and I send it to a teammate and they get the deal done. And we don't discuss terms or anything like that. We treat it like anybody else writing a contract. We're representing our clients. So me personally, I do not do dual. There's states that do not allow dual agency. And I want to preface that there are states that call dual agency something different. And so you have to really know the ins and outs. Like Maryland, dual agency is actually designated agency in the state of Virginia. So
yeah, if it's illegal in some states, then that should be a red flag. And Shawn, before this one, and for those listening, Ola, get a zoom in on that. I'm pointing to my ring finger. So before my wife, I was many years ago, I was helping out my girlfriend at the time to lease an apartment. And so we were looking at like 2 bedrooms for her and like her roommate. And I was also working with some renters that were looking for 2 bedrooms. And they were like, oh, can we go see this one? And I'm going to plead the fifth on what happened next. But my girlfriend got the apartment. And then I had to tell my clients.
Yeah.
I was just like, hey, just want to let you know that like my girlfriend got, or something like that. And they're like, oh, cool. Can we see any others that maybe your girlfriend isn't writing an application on? Something to that effect. And I was like, yeah, there's probably a better way to handle that. So I'm totally with, the Washington Post on this. Totally out on anything dual. You start seeing dual, there's no advantage to doing dual agency.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. So what he's talking about is when you have 2 buyers for the same property, and that is something different. And I don't know that's not dual agency. That is like dual buyers on the same property. That happens a lot less than you would think. Now, I've definitely had it happen where I was like, uh-oh, are they going to both write on the same property? And thankfully they didn't. But I've talked to many agents that are like, Shawn, what do I do? Like, what should I do? Should I have somebody else write this? Yeah, have somebody else write that. And sometimes it doesn't work out great, because one client feels slighted because you have 2 clients. And right now I have 2 buyer clients that are getting the same feed. They're getting the same properties over and over and over again. And I'm like, God, I hope they don't write on the same property, because then I'd be stuck. And I would not represent both in the same, to purchase the same property, because that is a conflict of interest. And the other thing is, like, you can give one advice, but like there are differences in buyers as well. So one buyer might not be able to beat out the other buyer, but then you have knowledge that this buyer is going to X amount and you beat them out. So it's just not fair.
So I'll say, if you want to do unrepresented and go directly to the listing agent, that's certainly an option. There's pros and cons with that, but certainly dual agency, where the listing agent is also signing a buyer broker agreement with the buyer, is something you want to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, moving on to the next one is termination, Shawn.
Yeah.
There are cases when buyers might want to back out of their contract with their agent while they're still searching. For example, they could find a different agent offering better terms. So what home buyers should look out for?
Thank you.
That's the only reason. The fine print can be sometimes hard to make it back out. So depending on, specifies that a buyer who withdraws from the contract without mutual consent from both sides would be considered in breach. This is for North Carolina. Your state may be different, and may still be liable for the agent's fee on on a subsequent sale during the specified time period. So, Shawn, what are your thoughts on the termination of the buyer agreement?
Yeah, the termination. I tell people, listen, you should have some sort of termination agreement on there. And I got to be honest, I haven't read the buyer agreement now. Is it just a 3-day?
Can we talk about we'll get to that. Can we talk about when the buyer may still be liable for the agent's fee? Because what I'm thinking is you have the line in there that says, listen, all right, so if a buyer and an agent go see house number 1 and the buyer's like, yeah, I love it, and then fires the agent the next day, and then the buyer writes on that first house, like clearly that first agent has been slighted. So usually in Virginia, there's a line that says, like, if within X number of days, sometimes, honestly, sometimes 30. I usually put 0 just because, like, if an agreement ends, it ends. It shouldn't have to carry on. But a lot of people do put 30 to protect themselves. Because, listen, you're going out, you're seeing a bunch of houses, and then you get fired, and then the next day they write on the same house. That's pretty messed up, right? It's like they're taking the money out from under you.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on, I want to be sure that we're covering when the buyer may still be liable for the agent's fee, because in the article, it's a little unclear if you just break up and then all of a sudden you owe 3% or 2.5%.
In our agreement, I always put 30 days. So if I've shown you a property and you haven't signed a new buyer agreement and our agreement is still, it just maybe terminated based on the date, right? It expired. I'm still covered for 30 days after that. And of any property that I showed you and you write on, you would owe me a commission at that point because I have worked to get you to see that property. And then all of a sudden now you're going behind my back or whatever and saying, I'm going to write with somebody else because they're giving me a better deal. This is the wrong thing for the Washington Post to say, because when you sign an agreement with somebody and saying, hey, I'm going to represent you and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for this amount. And then you go, oh, Shawn, you've been working for us for like 65 days. And I just found this guy, he's going to do it for less. So see ya. No, you're not. I've been working for you for 65 days and I deserve to be paid something. So that's why you should have an early termination fee. And I know there's a lot of buyers out there that say, I'll never sign anything for an early termination fee. Well, typically most buyers don't terminate their contracts, and that's the truth. There are some snakes in the grass that will terminate because of selfish reasons, because they can save a few bucks and they're going to stab somebody in the back for it, even though they have done all this work for them. So if you're signed an agreement with a buyer agent and you use another buyer agent to write the offer, you're going to owe that first agent that you signed the deal with, you're going to owe them money. Number 2, if the agreement expires and you go and write with the listing agent after that agreement expires for 30 days after, we're covered. However, where it doesn't cover you is if you sign a new buyer agreement with somebody else, which is required now that you do that. So I think your 30 days would basically be gone anyways, unless you went unrepresented. If you went unrepresented and you had the listing agent do what's called ministerial acts for you, which is writing the contract and facilitating the offer, you would then still owe that buyer agent a commission because you signed an agreement and they're covered for X amount of days, whatever day period that agent puts in that contract.
So a lot of people online are just uncomfortable signing any agreements. I mean, you sometimes wonder if these people are going to buy a house because you have to sign a contract, right? So I think if someone is uncomfortable signing a buyer broker agreement, sign one for 1 day, sign one for 7 days, sign one for 10 days until you realize that your service professional, the guy or gal that you see at Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and taking their dog for a walk is a real person that, is not trying to stab you in the back until you're comfortable. And then you can sign more of a long-term agreement.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like when I'm meeting somebody for the first time, I don't expect them to be like, oh, Shawn, we'll sign for you for 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do, but through education, through, meeting them a few times, then you'll create a relationship and then you'll get the agreement signed for longer. So if you have to do it property specific, if you have to do it for that day, that's fine as well. And that's kind of how you have to do things sometimes with the people that don't know who you are. They're coming in from out of town. So there are options to you as buyers. And but the reality is the buyer agreement has to be signed. And the good thing is in the state of Virginia, it's always had to be signed for a long time now. There was a time period before this where there were no buyer agency agreements, but it's been enacted for a long time here in the state of Virginia, but there are other states in the United States that have never had this, and so this is all new for these people.
Shawn, next one on the list is default fees. This one is actually pretty interesting. So if you're a buyer out there and you're purchasing a house, you're going to have ways to back out of the contract. If you're purchasing within a condo association or, God forbid, an HOA, for those HOA haters out there, there will be the HOA review period, for example. Maybe you have a financing contingency. Maybe there's an appraisal contingency, a septic contingency, a well inspection, things of that nature. And each of these have timelines on it. But what if you go through all the timelines and then you wake up one day and decide, I no longer want to buy the house? What if you unilaterally, without a contingency, back out of the property? Well, what's going to happen is you are going to lose your earnest money deposit and maybe more. Okay, so you put down an earnest money deposit, an EMD, with the contract at that time when you write the offer, and that could be 3 to 5% of the actual sales price. So this is a lot of money. But what happens to the agent's commission once you back out unilaterally? So maybe you forfeit the deposit, but the Washington Post says that several draft contracts reviewed hold the buyer responsible for paying the commissions when the buyer has quote unquote defaulted on the contract. Shawn, this is a very rare scenario, but it's actually a pretty good point, because what does happen? What's your experience with this?
Yeah, so it is very rare, and I can't even count how many times this has happened to me, because it's rare. But what I first want to say is, in the state of Virginia, your deposit is not automatically forfeited. People think that just because they put an earnest money deposit that the buyer or the seller automatically gets it. No, you have to sign a release of contract, and that release of contract will spell out who gets the deposit or how much. So you could negotiate at that point to say, hey, listen, I put a $50,000 deposit. I want out of this. I'll give you $25,000. And the thing is, both parties have to sign that release. That release then says that you will not sue me on top of this. If I give you this, you will not sue me. However, if you as a seller, the buyer backs out and you as the seller says, wait, this deposit means nothing to me, I want to sue them, you have every right to sue them. You could do a few different things in this. So buyer beware, if you back out beyond this, you could lose your deposit. That's not the limit of your liability. You could be sued on top of that. You could also be sued for specific performance, which means they will sue you to make you buy the house. And number 3, you would be liable for reasonable attorney fees as well. And on top of that, yes, you could be liable if I forced it to pay me my commission, because I brought you as a buyer, a ready, willing, and able buyer, and you purchased a property and you went under contract and I got you almost to settlement, and then you said, nope, I don't want to. Well, guess what? Now you owe commissions on top of that. So you would be responsible for that. So you have to be very wary of backing out of a deal. Now, would I hold you responsible for that commission? It depends on the situation. If you were a complete jerk, and then maybe I would, but for the most part, I probably wouldn't. I'd be like, good, but I'm sorry this happened.
Is there like a clause in the contract, like a jerk fee? Like where, like what does the contract actually say? And are you sure that the release of the deposit is negotiable once you miss all the contingencies? So you've defaulted on the contract, and now you can hold that hostage until
Yeah, it's not as easy as you would think to take that deposit. I was sure until you brought this up. I was sure until this contract changed. There might be some new changes to this contract. We got to
ask Todd Condren with Echo Title.
Yeah. I would like to hear this.
Guy knows everything.
What I've always learned or heard is that the deposit is not that easy to just take, right? You can't just take a deposit, because an escrow agent is holding that deposit. So they need instructions to release that deposit. They can't just release it to whoever. They need a release of contract. And that contract, that release of contract, until signed, they will hold on to that deposit unless a court says they need to get rid of it. So until they get that release of contract will spell out, and it says right there, we agree to, this is how it used to say, we agree to release this contract, and so-and-so will get this much, like seller will get this much of the deposit, buyer will retain this much, and this much goes to the real estate agent. So you can spell it out right on that release on who gets what. So yeah, you cannot just take a deposit. It's not that
Well,
easy.
the buyer definitely has to sign the release of deposit
Correct.
in Virginia.
They both do.
And the seller has to sign it too. And if there's any sort of quibbles about that, the seller immediately puts the property back on the market. And I think, one agent is basically going to tell the other agent that we're going to take you to court until you release the full deposit. And so one party is going to threaten holding the deposit until they get some of it back, and the other party is going to say, you're completely in the wrong here. We will take you to court unless you give us the full deposit.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is the seller can't sell that property until you have released that contract, or if you've released the litigation that's going on that property. So you can't market it. You can't go back on the market. I guess you could go back on the market pending the release of contract, but you can't take another offer, and you can't sell that property without being released from the first one. So you have to be careful. It's rare that this happens, but it does happen. And you can get yourself into a big, big screw up. And you know what I'll say is, this is the regional sales contract. If you get into builder contracts, man, the builder contracts are insanely different. And a lot of times they will say, you will forfeit. If you void this contract, you will forfeit your deposit. This is not the limit. It's automatic, right? We get it. And any upgrades that you've done, we get it. We get the money because you've prepaid for that. You do not get it back. And so they're super tight as far as a builder contract. So if you're thinking of backing out on a builder side, it's completely different. Call a lawyer. Make sure that you know what you're doing prior to anything like that.
So last one on the list is arbitration. Speaking of the court system, what home buyers should look out for: any binding arbitration clause that limits the buyer's rights to litigate a dispute or caps damages could be risky. Shawn, we're working with a lot of first-time home buyers. If people start crossing out the arbitration paragraph in a contract or in a buyer agent contract, that's going to raise some red flags for me. These contracts are written by attorneys who hopefully know what they're doing, but if we start crossing out general language in the contract, to me, we're making this a bigger mess than what we should.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is a lot of attorneys will actually try to scratch things out and different things. The arbitration clause, I've been to arbitration once. It was not fun.
You didn't enjoy it?
No, it wasn't good. I didn't make any money in that transaction. It was so much work. I did so much for this buyer. It's like a nightmare, man. She helped somebody buy a car, and then she wasn't approved for the thing, and she defaulted. And so we had to go to arbitration for it. And
over what? What was the arbitration about?
She had no contingencies in the contract, and
so
she tried to back out.
She wanted
to
unilaterally back out of the contract, and they were basically going to try to sue her to buy the place, or was this over the deposit?
Yeah, it was over the deposit.
Over the deposit.
Yeah, and so we had to give some up, and it was very little. It was a small property. It was a long time ago. But the fact is, in 21 years, I've gone to arbitration one time. I've done 700 and some sales one time, and so it's not like you're going to see this that often. But giving your right up to sue is pretty substantial, right? I mean, now you're going to an arbitration hearing to see how they're going to do this. And I think that could be pretty significant in my eyes. Like, if I gave up my right to sue somebody because they defaulted in a contract, I would find a little bit of fault in that. So I would watch that. I don't know. That's not in our contract.
It mentions in Oregon, for example, a draft contract distributed to an agent warns that both parties are giving up the right to have the matter tried by a judge and jury. So again, this is very state specific.
Yeah, exactly.
Consumer advocates recommend trying to resolve small disputes out of court while keeping open the option to sue over larger matters.
Yeah, I would always want to keep my option open, because you never know what every deal is completely different. So by blanketing this with a no litigation clause and arbitration clause, then that, every deal is different, and you should not waive that right, in my opinion.
That is the article, Shawn. We'll list and link it below. On the article, it had 431 comments on the Washington Post.
That's a lot.
A lot of people. I think they hit the magic word of, commissions and contracts and real estate. And that is the equation to get 431 comments on the internet.
Yeah, and listen, you're signing a contract. It doesn't matter what side you're on. You're signing a contract. You abide by that contract just like in anything else. So,
all right, that'll just about do it for another episode. Be sure to comment down below. Hit the thumbs up button if you haven't already. And for Shawn and myself, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you then.
Take care.